guys, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. My name is Katie and I'm so happy to have you here. Today we are talking about the difference between RAW format files and JPEGs. Maybe you're a newer photographer, but you've probably heard about other photographers recommending shooting in manual and then shooting in RAW format. You've probably seen some people, clients asking for RAW files. What does this mean? What is RAW format? What are RAW files versus JPEGs? What are JPEGs? In my opinion, as a wedding photographer, so I'm a wedding photographer, these are the two biggest differences, I think the most important differences between shooting in RAW and shooting in JPEG that kind of apply to my business. So hopefully this helps kind of clarify any questions that you have between the two. The first main difference is the file size between RAW and JPEG. But first we're gonna back up. RAW and JPEG are file types. A lot of times when clients ask for RAW images, they are asking primarily for unedited images, but that's not what RAW images means. RAW is a file type, so it's kind of like .jpeg. It's also if you shoot on Nikon, NEF, but that is the RAW file format. So I wanted to make that distinction. RAW does not mean just unedited. You can have an unedited JPEG image as well, but it's the type of file that your camera is shooting. And so if you want to shoot in RAW, you just go into the back end of your settings and make sure you are shooting in that RAW format. So I mentioned their file types. Let's get into a big difference between RAW format and JPEG, and that is file size. So according to Adobe, they have an article, the difference between the two, and they go into a lot more detail than I'm gonna go into in this video. So I will make sure I will link that down below. So if you really wanna get into a lot more of the differences, you can. But like I said, I'm just gonna be focusing on the two that I find most important as a wedding photographer. So according to Adobe, the main difference between JPEG and RAW is the file size. RAW files are significantly larger than JPEGs. And honestly, RAW files are bigger than most other image formats. So why is that? RAW images contain all the raw information that your camera captures. And these files are completely uncompressed. So it's almost like there's more data in that image, if that makes sense. The RAW file holds all of the original detail of the image, so you have complete control over that image because it has all of that data. Nothing is compressed in the image. You have more control over the editing process after. JPEGs are smaller because all the data is compressed. So yes, a lot of times I will edit my RAW files and export in JPEG because I'm not going to send this gigantic file size to my clients. I will send JPEGs, which are a little bit smaller. Obviously, you're exporting in high quality and they're not like super blurry compressed pictures, but in terms of taking the actual picture, the setting in your camera, RAW format is like superior to JPEG. The second thing I find most important between RAW format and JPEG is also the quality. Capturing and storing all the details that pass through your camera's sensor when you take an image. It means the RAW image has a dynamic range and a far greater color spectrum versus JPEGs who compress that data. So what does that mean? Basically, if a RAW image, for example, is you take a picture and it's underexposed, it can more likely be salvaged if saved or if taken as RAW versus JPEG. You have just more access to the RAW files of the image. You can then salvage it and make it more of your style versus JPEG, which all that information is compressed. And honestly, most of the time, if you under or overexpose a JPEG image, you're kind of out of luck. So why should you shoot in RAW? I think it's the editing. I know it's a very large file size, so yes, it will take up more storage on your camera, on your memory cards, but I think the potential of saving images and just the editing potential and the look and the style is so important, and you will lose that if you don't shoot in RAW. So if I could say anything, if you buy a new camera, if you are new to photography, I would say number one, change your settings to make sure you are shooting in RAW format. Number one, first thing I do with every new camera that I get, because they always default to JPEG. They just do. So make sure you are shooting in RAW format. Go in the back end of your settings on your camera and change it there. And second, learn to shoot in manual mode. So those are the two big things that I recommend to photographers, especially if you're just starting out. I hope that this has convinced you enough to go ahead and change your settings and start shooting in RAW, but I also want to show you the difference in the editing between this, like for the same image, editing a RAW image versus editing a JPEG image. Okay, so I'm going to show you, these are pictures that a photographer friend and we did like a photo swap for some headshots. She accidentally had her camera set to shooting in both RAW and JPEG at the same time. So I have double files for all of my headshots, which is totally fine, it's not a big deal. And it actually has worked out because of this video, so now I get to show you the between RAW and JPEG. So I'm gonna go right down here and see, this is the, you see the file name here, I can't highlight it. It is the RAW file for Nikon versus, you go to this one, this is JPEG. So we can see it's the same file, just a different format. So like I said, I'm going to be editing this file. This is the RAW file. This is the JPEG file. You can see it already looks different. And I think this is a great picture to show you too, because it was starting to get dark. It was actually, I think, raining at this point when we were taking pictures. So I can show you really the difference because the picture is a little bit darker. I have a whole video on my channel talking about how I edit my photos. So I have the Maston Labs presets. So if you want to see how I kind of edit my photos with that preset, you can watch that video. I'll link it down below. I'm just gonna apply a very basic preset and watch when I go up with the exposure. So I'm gonna go all the way up to, I think this is pretty good. I'm going to warm it up a little bit, do some color grading. I'm just doing a very, like, this is like a really basic edit that I would do. Bring my skin tone down a little bit. Yeah, and then let's go ahead and crop this in so I'm a bit more centered. Okay, so really quick edit. Yeah, so this is a really quick edit of me looking at my camera and making a really weird face actually now that I'm looking at this, but you can see the difference before and after of, I mean, how bright this photo can be and the editing potential of it. So before and after. And so I'm gonna go ahead and copy these settings, the exact same settings. And I'm gonna go to this picture, which again is the JPEG picture. And let's go ahead and do, you know, like let's crop it a bit. Okay, so it's very similar to this one, right? And we're gonna do the auto transform, putting that one on. Yeah. So it should be very similar crop style to the other one. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste the settings. I mean, look at the difference between this image and this image. Same exact settings. You can see it's more, I want to say contrasty, like if that's a word. Obviously very red in my face. And I would actually have to like take some of the saturation of some things down, like cool it off a bit. I know I fixed my skin tone in this picture, so I'm gonna do the exact same thing in this one. So I'm gonna go to the color range and make my skin tone like doing the exact same thing to this image. But doesn't it just look more orange and contrasty and not like that soft vibe that this image gives off. Like, look how much more natural this image looks too. Like, I look like a real person in this image versus this looks like an Instagram filter, okay? I mean, I don't know like how to salvage this. I would need to like soften the shadows and like bring the contrast back so much. I'm gonna put these images side by side really quickly, and I hope that you can see what a massive difference editing in this RAW format versus JPEG. Like I said, this is the exact same picture, and I copied and pasted the exact same settings, but one looks significantly better than the other. Like I said, this looks more natural. The RAW image, editing that looks way more natural, way more like true to color, what it actually looks like, versus editing the JPEG picture. It makes it look like you just put an Instagram filter. The image that was edited in the RAW format is much more my vibe. So I hope this video convinced you at the very least to start shooting in RAW on your camera. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. Bye!